I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am on traditional territories of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples. I pay tribute to their legacy and the legacy of all First Peoples of Canada with respect and with gratitude. I choose to reflect on the meaning of respect and the responsibility that I share for the sustainability of these lands and how I can do my part to ensure that Indigenous peoples across Canada and the lands they were forced to share with us is centered in my work. I believe that we all have a responsibility to not only acknowledge the grounds on which we are privileged to live and work, but to also continue to grow our learning of Indigenous histories and realities. I share responsibility to restore relationships with the caretakers of this land that is based in peace, friendship, and trust through my commitment to reconciliation, partnership, and understanding. Before we move on, I wanted to spend a moment to explore what we're going to be learning about from today's webinar. We're going to start off by talking about stress and how does our experience change when it comes to stress, specifically during the holiday season. What's that nuance? What's that difference that it can bring? From there, we're going to move into exploring different types of stressors, as well as some of the symptoms that we can experience, and as well as some of the signs that we might notice show up for others. From there, we're going to move on to exploring coping strategies, ways that we can focus on restoring ourselves, replenishing ourselves through either focusing on the problem or focusing our emotions or focusing on both when it comes to navigating being in a place where we're experiencing stress or overwhelm. From there, we're going to learn about stress and bandwidth and what the relationship they hold with each other. Bandwidth can also be referred to our capacity. And when we're navigating being in a stressful situation or even a stressful environment, that can impact our bandwidth and end up with it becoming more narrow and more limited, which also holds its own impacts. And that we'll get into that in more detail later on. And then lastly, we're going to learn about how to find balance, especially during the holiday seasons, and how it can shift our focus and cause us to really be quite connected to doing. We're going to look at how we can really be intentional and cultivate space to also to be in the present moment and to experience how we can stay connected to what's happening around us as well as what's happening within us. And then lastly, we're going to open the floor for any questions folks might have. So let's move on. Stress in the holidays. Why is stress so impactful during the holiday season? And this can be due to a variety of reasons. Something that we know that can happen is the holiday season can really shift our level of responsibilities. If we look at that within the realm of the workplace or organizations, the end of the year also coincides with the end of the fiscal year. And what that can do is create a lot of deadlines, create a lot of end of the year deliverables that we need to meet. That time period can also be echoed within academia and the school realm with exams, with assignments that are due. So again, more of an increase in deadlines. And then on top of that, there's even more. There can be this expectation or social pressure to engage, to plan outings, to plan gathering, and then also to plan how we're going to celebrate the holidays, depending on what that looks like for us. And taking all of that into consideration, that really can be quite impactful for us from an energetic place because the end of the year might be a time period when we're feeling maybe depleted. Our energy might not be might not feel as robust as it might have in the past or at an earlier point in the year. So now we're facing having an increased amount of tasks and responsibilities, but also access to less energy in order to do so. That that could impact our motivation. That can lead us, if we were experiencing depletion, that can shift us in a place of exhaustion and impact our productivity when we're operating from a place when we're running kind of on empty. There also can be signs and symptoms of when our stress levels are really hitting the maximum for us. And some of those experiences are on this slide. And in addition to what's there, can be feelings of depression, of isolation, and withdrawal. When we think about this list, something that it also can reveal is how we can experience a shift in our reactivity. When we're under a lot of stress or when we're experiencing overwhelm, that can change what causes us to react. That can change our feelings, the sources of our feelings of irritability, frustration, or even anger. That might look really different in terms of what tips the balance for us when we're not in that stressful situation. And so when we think about that within the context of the holidays, that also helps capture how we can show up within ourselves, within our relationships with others, differently than what might be our norm because of the overwhelm the holiday season can bring. To explore stressors in more detail, something that we know is that there are different types of them. And one type can be interpersonal, which is very much focused on sources of stress which stem from our relationships from others or our relational connections with others, whether those folks are our friends, our peers, our colleagues, our professor, our supervisor. We can also experience stress intrapersonally. And when we're focused within that realm, those are stressors that stem from our internal experiences, more so our emotions, our thoughts, our physical symptoms. And then lastly, we can also experience stressors environmentally, which is more so focused on stressors that can exist within our school or our work environment, or even the wider world. When we're able to really identify what type of stressor am I facing, that can also really help us determine whether it's possible for us to identify problem solving or solutions that might make that stressor a little less stressful for us. I know lots of stress in that sentence. It can help position us in a place where we can think about, is there something that we could potentially change in that situation we're experiencing, even if that's something really small that can allow us to turn down that volume to make that situation a little bit more tolerable. But in order to arrive at that place, we need to be able to determine what is the type of stressor I'm facing, as well as what can I control in the situation and what might be outside of my control, because that is going to affect how much ability that we have to turn down that dial and explore what could we potentially change in the situation we're navigating. And now we all have a different level of stress that we can hold without tipping the balance in either direction. And what that amount looks like is going to be different for each person, because it's influenced by our genetics, it's influenced by our attitude and our outlook on life, and it's also influenced by how stress management has modeled throughout our lives because we learn from that and we take from that. We learn from observing how to be in stressful situations from how folks are in their own. If we could kind of conceptualize holding our stress bucket and moving through our day to day with it. And every stressor that we encounter is a glass filled with water. And that glass filled with water gets poured into our bucket. That's one stressor. Can you imagine how many glasses we could potentially encounter and end up becoming poured in our bucket throughout the course of our day? We know that as a result, the water level in our bucket is going to continue to rise and rise and rise, and we don't want it to overflow. So one way that we can prevent that from happening, from our buckets overflowing as a result of the day-to-day stressors we might be facing, is by looking at ways that allow us to poke holes in that bucket, because that allows a release. It allows those stressors to have some place to go. And the way that we can achieve that is through using coping strategies, our coping tools, and our self-care practices. Why this metaphor can be especially more impactful during the holidays is that our bucket, that starting place for a bucket, it might not be empty. It might be, let's say, halfway full. And what that's going to tell us is that it's going to take a lot less for that water level to rise, which will require us to be even more mindful that those holes are present and are being maintained to help release our stressors because there's more of an abundance of them during stressful times. When we think about, okay, how do I do that? How do I utilize coping strategies and tools to help move through experiences of overwhelm? One of the things that we can do rather is to use problem-centered coping strategies. And when we're approaching coping with our intention focused on the problem, that really helps us target what's at the root of our stressor, what's at the core. That can be really helpful because it can lead to reducing the stress or reducing the anxiety that's coming up for us. It really focuses on um, concrete and tangible ways that we can create shifts in a situation. It invites us to explore what could we do about it? What can we do about the problem that may help shift how we feel about it? For an example, a problem-centered strategy might be exploring if we can leave a tense situation. Can we change our surroundings? Could we bring someone else on board? Can we ask for help? Can we take a step back or take a break rather and focus on self care? Those are ways that we can use problem focused strategies in action. Additionally, we can also use emotion focused tools. And these are quite different because they really focus on how we can move through our emotions about a stressful situation. It doesn't focus as much on tangible ways or concrete ways or what we can do to change the situation itself. It explores ways that we can help de escalate our emotions or ways that we can reframe our thoughts about the stressor that we're facing. And some examples, as we can see, are relaxation activities or deep breathing. That could look like movement. That could look like making art, journaling, listening to music, or playing an instrument, for a couple of examples. To go into these strategies in more details, again, we can see that when we're approaching, again, how we can poke those holes in our bucket from a problem-centered space, we know that our focus is on how we can solve the issue we're facing rather than how we can process or unpack our emotions. This can be helpful because for some folks, it might feel more aligned with them. It might feel more accessible to start by tackling the problem than necessarily going into unpacking our feelings or emotions. Alternatively, um, emotion focused coping or emotion centered coping, we know that's where we're really exploring our emotional reaction, our emotional responses to a situation, to overwhelm, to stress. That can be helpful if we experience, as we can see here, anxiety, sadness, anger, or fear that's coming up for us. That can be when we're moving through those experiences, emotion focused coping can be really helpful. What are some options? What are some things that we can do, especially when we are navigating being in the holiday season and being stretched in so many different directions? Let's talk about that. First, one way that we can put problem-centered strategies into actions is by creating a to-do list. And when I mean to do a to-do list, I mean like pen and paper and be that's for a couple of reasons. Firstly, writing a list can really create structure. It can create clarity on our starting points. It can help prioritize what we need to get done. While at the same time, it can also create a sense of satisfaction if this resonates with you from being able to cross things off that list. It can feel good. It can feel like we were able to see our accomplishments in front of us. Additionally, it can provide an opportunity to really break down a large goal or a large problem into smaller, more manageable pieces. And that can be really helpful when we're navigating overwhelm. In addition to making a list to do, sometimes we can get caught up and really focus on what we haven't been able to get done. And this is an invitation to also make space to honor and explore and appreciate what you've been able to do, that even if those pieces aren't on your to-do list, because there are so many little bits in between that need to get done in order for those things on a to-do list to also get done. However, sometimes we can lose sight and not see that movement and that effort as being just as valuable. So this is an invitation and reminder to celebrate both everything that you're doing that's on that list, as well as the things that you're able to do that may not be on it. Another tool that we can use is to create room to pause. Because stress can be so impactful and it can be so activating for our nervous system, it can oftentimes trigger our fight or flight response. And when that happens, when we're feeling overwhelmed, or experiencing really intense emotions, that can be a moment of time when we take a step back to create that opportunity to pause and regulate our emotions and practice our self soothing tools to help us access a place of balance again so that we can step back into that situation from a place of centeredness. Sometimes when we're juggling a lot of different pieces and we're experiencing pressure or faced with a deadline, it can be really difficult to uh, determine where to get started. When we have so many moving pieces, how do I know what to get started with first? And one way that we can create clarity for ourselves is to start with the easiest problem. Why that can be impactful is that give us a sense of accomplishment. It can allow us to have the opportunity to feel really effective in being able to get that ball rolling and being able to create that momentum, and that can help really create that urge to move on to what's next when we're able to really sit in the appreciation and our ability to tackle that first step. That can that can create that desire to keep going for us. Another problem focused strategy that we can use is to ask for help. Especially when we find ourselves stretched during the holidays and we have competing commitments. We have family commitments, we have commitments at home, at school, at work. It's okay to ask for help. It's so important to remember that we're not alone and we can lean on our circles and we can lean on our support networks to help outsource help. When we're also in a challenging situation or a stressful situation, this can also cause our self talk to shift. And our self talk, our inner dialogue is so unique. And I say that because it's so personal. We are the only folks who know really what our self talk sounds like, what that verbiage is like. And when we're navigating a difficult situation, it can also cause our self talk to become more negative. And that can make an already difficult situation more difficult. So it's really important during these times that we work to adjust what our self-talk sounds like and to really carve out and create messaging, affirmations, words that are motivating for us, that are uplifting for us, as well as feel authentic to who we are. That gives us an opportunity to practice being our own cheerleader and hyping ourselves up. And what that can do is give us that motivation and give us that encouragement to keep going, especially when we feel overwhelmed. Knowing when to take a break. Again, during the holidays, it can be that line of what our limit is and stepping outside of it, it can almost become a bit blurred. And so it can be helpful to know when is it time to take a break for you? How do you know that it's there? When do you need to push that pause button and maybe shift from problem-centered coping and move into emotion-centered coping to give yourself access to that spaciousness and to re-anchor yourself in what your limits are like. Some emotion centered strategies can include journaling. And journaling can be such a useful medium for acknowledging and exploring and processing our emotions and feelings. And sometimes judgment can also creep into our journaling. Judgment can be a bit insidious sometimes, and I know we mention it, or maybe I can say I mention judgment a lot because it has a way of showing up and almost escaping our consciousness. It's all of a sudden it's there, and that can happen even when we're journaling. So it can be really helpful to make sure that we're expressing our emotions and judgment isn't trying to get in the way. And we can do that by really identifying that we have the right to feel the way that we do, by identifying that the way we feel and our emotions are valid. We can also use mindfulness meditation, which is a really great skill at allowing us to notice and be in our emotions in a non judgmental way. And mindfulness can be most effective when it's part of our day to day life and part of our daily practice. Acceptance, and specifically radical acceptance, which comes from DBT or dialectical behavioral therapy, um, is a skill that's focused on exploring whether there's something we can make peace with in a stressful situation we're faced with, or if there's something we could change or shift in terms of our emotional response to it. And it can be a little bit complex because it doesn't ask for us to be okay with what that situation is, or to like it, or to be fine with it. It's really focused on what can we adjust or change about it, so that it becomes more tolerable for us, whether that's in terms of how we feel, or something about it that we can accept and sit with greater ease. Talking about it, it can be when we're really stretched in many different directions. Maybe sometimes we can second guess ourselves and wonder, do I have space to really talk about what's coming up for me? Or do I even have space to focus on myself in that way? Especially when I'm trying to cross, many things off that list. It's really important that even when we're overwhelmed, that we carve out that space and time to acknowledge our emotions and to express our emotions, because we can fall into ways and behaviors in response to them that can stuff them down, that can suppress them, that can avoid them. And something that we know about our emotions is that the longer we ignore them and we don't give them the attention that they're seeking, what we end up doing is creating space for them to grow in intensity. And our emotions can intensify to a point where we can no longer ignore them. And so that there's that ask in being really intentional and purposeful of connecting with folks who we feel safe with and we trust, or professionals to share our internal world and landscape and to share our feelings. Um, to help ensure that we're continuously staying open and responding to them and not slipping into behaviors where we can end up turning away from them. We know that with planning for the holiday season, something that can easily slip from our plans is ourselves, is making time for ourselves to focus on our self relationships and to focus on our self care routine. When we're able to plan ahead and really set times to participate in those activities that allow us to maintain our wellness, that can be really helpful because it can keep us accountable, and it can allow us to commit to really fulfilling those activities, because we can get caught up in the season and forget to make time for ourselves. With that being said, I also recognize that sometimes things happen and we have to change or we have to pivot, and that's okay. It's really important that if that results in us having to adjust or moving our self-care activity, that we reschedule it, that we don't forget about it, that it's not a write-off for the day, that we still commit to upholding what that is we identified for ourselves, even if it has to happen at a different space and time. How we practice self-care can happen and look differently. We can practice self-care proactively, which is when self-care is part of our daily routine. It's when we have an idea, maybe we have a self-care box or we have a self-care list of what works for us, on what works for you, that allows you to feel better in the moment when you're not feeling so great. It can be really helpful to have knowledge and have idea around what self-care is like for you, because during the time when we need it, it can be really difficult to think about ideas in that moment, because oftentimes our thinking brains are not online, and so to think about, what can I do for self-care can be really challenging. So I invite you to keep a list of what works for you, or keep those items in a space that are accessible for you so that you can use them during those moments when you need it without thinking about what to do. Reactive self-care is different. That can be more self-care practices that we use after we've already entered into a place of burnout. And that doesn't mean those activities aren't effective. They are. But even looking at the visual of the batteries on this slide, what it tells us is when we're able to be proactive in our self-care practices, that can allow us to, or rather, that can prevent us from entering a place of burnout. When we're already in a place of burnout, it might take a longer time to get to a place where we are feeling restored. We might need to take a break or take a longer pause in order to be able to do that. When it comes to the holiday season, it can be really helpful to take some time and take some space and, and reflect on what's important to you, on what you want to feel during this time period, what it is that you want to do, how you want to give it meaning. This can be an opportunity for you to be the author and define what you want the holidays to mean. And one way that you can do that is through setting priorities. That's also a practice of self-care. Setting priorities can be an invitation to reflect on what's important to you this year. And when you're able to gain clarity and insight on what that is, that can we can take that a step further. And for example, if you want the holidays to mean rest and space to really focus on your self relationship and your self care, that's excellent. You can really schedule the time and schedule the activities that you will participate in. That can allow you to cultivate that experience. Additionally, if your goal is to spend time maybe pouring into your social relationships, that's excellent as well. And you can also carve out time to connect with folks, to make dates to get together and connect. When it comes to our priorities and our boundaries, um, the holiday season, again, is when things can become a little bit blurry, or rather, it can be a time when there are more attempts to cross our boundaries. Our boundaries are important all year long within every different realm and sphere of our lives. Um, but there's an additional layer during the holiday seasons because of that blurriness which can occur. Similarly to how we can tend to step outside of our limits during this time period. When we're trying to think about what our boundaries are, when able to stay connected to our priorities, that can create clarity for us. That can help us determine what to say no to. Because we can say no to the things that don't align with those priorities that we'd identified previously. Because oftentimes, when we're really trying to work on honoring and upholding a boundary for ourselves, it requires to say yes to us and no to something else. And so by being able to maintain our connection to our priorities, that can also allow us to maintain clarity on what it is that we may need to say no to in order to say yes to ourselves. Let's explore how stress can impact our bandwidth, or in another word, our capacity, because bandwidth and capacity are quite similar. Bandwidth can be described as our mental energy, our mental fuel. It can be narrow or more limited, and other times it can be wide and really spacious. Our bandwidth is what helps us make decisions. It helps us process information. It helps us be with and regulate our emotions, and to get tasks completed in our daily lives. When our bandwidth is more narrow or more limited, we can find even small decisions to be very overwhelming, and notice ourselves enter a place where we're experiencing decision fatigue quite quickly, we might find it really difficult to regulate our emotions. We might find ourselves not being able to experience joy as easily, and shifts in our ability to pay attention and to concentrate. And so, because of those changes, it's really important to explore ways that we can refuel or that we can expand our bandwidth so that it's in that space of spaciousness again, because that's going to allow us to do all those things: process that information, regulate our emotions, maintain our energy, and prevent us from entering a place of depletion or burnout. It can have a really positive impact on our overall outlook on life. You might find yourself asking, okay, so this is how our bandwidth works. How do we refuel it? What are the things that I can do if it's becoming more narrow to create more room again? And that's something that can happen when we're experiencing all the various stressors that can come up during the holiday season. That can reduce our bandwidth and impact our ability to maintain our wellness, impact our ability to be productive, and our ability to meet those deadlines. So let's explore ways that we can refuel. When we're able to meet our needs for movement, physical movement, for nutrition, that can really help reset us, and resource us and fuel us. When it comes to distractions, because we live in a technologically filled world and we have a lot of notifications, there are a lot of different applications that are vying for our attention. When I frame it like that, I'm like, that sounds kind of good. Well, because of all of those potential interruptions, our attention can be pulled from our attention can end up being pulled in many different directions, almost similar to what we can experience when we're multitasking. We're focused on so many different things at the same time. No one task really receives our full attention, and that can end up depleting our bandwidth. So it can be really helpful to create boundaries around technology, around our notifications, giving ourselves permission to focus on one task at a time so that we're able to refuel our bandwidth and prevent it from being depleted by trying to do too many things at once. Creating habits. Sometimes when we're really overwhelmed and we're faced with many different deadlines, we might feel like we have to choose between our wellness and our responsibilities. It can create that feeling of something has to be taken off this list, something has to give. And oftentimes that thing we deprioritize or we take off that list is our wellness or our self-care. That can often be the first thing to go. And by creating habits, it helps us safeguard those activities that we need to take care of ourselves so that even during times of stress, we're really able to uphold and honor what we need to maintain our wellness, even during those periods of times when we might feel like we don't have access to the same amount of space or opportunity to focus on ourselves, and it can make sure those habits or that routine happens even in the space of stress. Creating pause, it can be really helpful in replenishing and recovering our bandwidth when we can create a moment to pause and take a break. In order to determine when we need to take a pause, can be achieved through beginning to build our awareness around what helps fuel us and what ends up depleting us. That can help us really slow down It can help us reevaluate and analyze what's showing up for us. In addition to that, when we're able to build our awareness around when we move into a state of stress and catch those moments or those micro moments that it can be sometimes, the moments before we enter being in a place of stress and when we're already there can also be opportunities in time that we can create a pause. When we know what are the signs and symptoms, what are the experience that show up for me that tell me I'm moving into a space of stress, that can be an opportunity to take that step back, to really focus on ways that you can refuel and recover your bandwidth and take a break, take a pause, especially given the hecticness and busyness of the holiday season. We might need to be quite intentional in giving us permission to slow down and access that space. How long we're there can vary depending on the signs that we've noticed ourselves experiencing. If we've noticed ourselves experiencing burnout, that can be an indication that the duration of the pause for us might need to be more of a lengthy one. Now, going into our doing mind versus our being mind. At the beginning of the webinar, I spoke to how we can sometimes navigate the holidays in strong connection to our doing mind, which is a mind state that we have, which really focuses on meeting our goals, problem solving, that's quite task oriented. It's a part of our mind that's really good at getting things done. The other mind state that we have is our being mind, which is really focused on showing up in the present moment and savoring the moment. That's the part of our mind state that can sometimes become lost when we're experiencing overwhelm or we're caught up in a state of busyness. The space that both of those mind states overlapped is called the wise mind. And when we're able to access our wise mind, that allows us to be fully present and connected to what's happening around us and within us while we pursue a goal or a task that we have. Again, our doing mind is effective. It gets things done. It allows us to meet our goals. It allows us to plan for the future. It allows us to manage our responsibilities of home, of school, of work. Um, while at the same time, when we spend too much time in our doing mind, we can fall into autopilot. We can fall into a space where we can become very focused on our goals and then the next goal, and then the goal after that, and the goal after that. We can lose touch with the present moment um, and with what's happening around us because our main focus and priority can become solely our goals, which is why when we discuss the doing mind and being mind, we want to work on creating a sense of balance or a sense of equilibrium so that we're able to access both mind states without leaning more into one or the other. The being mind is not so much focused on the goals. The being mind is very much focused on experience, on our being connected and showing up in the present moment, whether that's enjoying a conversation with a friend or having a meal or being out in nature for some examples. It really focuses on savoring and experiencing. It's not as focused on um, our goals or necessarily meeting our needs, which can be impactful because when we lean too much in our being minds, that can also cause our needs to go unmet, which can create its own source of stressors in the long term future. Which is why finding that middle ground, finding that space of overlap through the wise mind is where we're trying to go, because that's what can allow us to find that balance where we can instead of rushing through a deadline and trying to go, 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 it can allow us to slow that process down and allow us to still be aware and connected to what we're experiencing, what's happening, what are those moments like for us as we work to progress in meeting that deadline. It allows us to be present in the moment and work towards our goals. So it really takes the best of both worlds, doing mind and being mind, and really weaves that together. So how what are some other ways that we can create balance between doing mind and being mind? And this can be so relatable to how we navigate the holidays because it really invites us to reflect on how can we be more intentional on creating more opportunities to shift our focus to being, because the energy associated with the season is so much focused on doing. One way that we can do that is by really checking in with ourselves through the course of our day, and reflecting on where is my mind state? Am I am I focused on experiencing the moment, or am I focused on doing and achieving? Again, bringing back that skill of pause. If we notice ourselves being in doing mind for an extended period of time, for example, if you're at work or maybe you're sitting and maybe 5 hours have gone by and you didn't even notice, that can be an indication that you've been stuck in doing mind for quite a bit of time. That can be an opportunity to take a break and to shift your attention to enter being mind for a period of time. And that can be facilitated through the breath, that can be facilitated through noticing the sensations that are showing up in your body, or shifting your environment if you can. If you can go outside, and if that's not accessible for you, if you can observe the outside world through a window and appreciate the world from a different view. It can also be really helpful and replenishing for our bandwidths to create opportunities to be in our being mind that allow us to be in the present moment without having to consider or hold what's happening next, to allow ourselves to be and not be worried or not have to sit on our consciousness what we have to do next, where we need to go next, or what the next moment has to be like. Really being able to focus with our full presence and our full selves in the present moment. It can also be helpful to explore ways that we can focus on how we can appreciate um, and observe the process rather than paying attention only to the outcome, which can really happen when we're working on a specific project or a deadline. Really looking at how can we bring our attention to explore what happens in that space in between, in that space of start to finish, because there are so many different experiential opportunities that we can gain if we're able to bring our awareness to that space. I know I'm a bit over time today, and so I did want to pause and invite folks to pop any questions that they have in the chat, or to unmute yourself and ask your question out loud before we move on to takeaways and key points. Okay. Okay, I think we might be good with questions, but feel free to pop in or unmute your mic. I just want to be mindful of your time and also uh, revisit a couple of key points just to leave you with. Um, Remembering those moments, firstly, those micro moments, if you're even able to, before you enter a state of stress and that space where you're definitely sure you are stressed, looking at how those moments and times can be opportunities to pause, to really step back and take a break, focus on those activities that allow you to refuel your bandwidth, to refuel yourself, to prevent entering a place of depletion, exhaustion, or potentially burnout. To stay connected and revisit your priorities for the holiday season, to remember that you are the author and can define what the holiday seasons mean to you, what they look like, how they are experienced, and what they can feel like. And know that however you define it, you can always go back to that drawing board and make adjustments. Staying connected to your priorities can make it really helpful to say no to things that don't align with them. When we're able to create habits, they can help us really avoid deprioritizing our wellness activities, our self care activities, when we're pulled in different directions, especially by our responsibilities or by our deadlines. By integrating our doing mind and being mind, that can allow us to find balance. It can allow us to be task oriented and be ambitious and be goal oriented, while at the same time being able to show up and be present in that process. It allows us to show up and be present in the moment and still pursue those goals that we have identified for ourselves. When we're able to plan our self care in advance, that allows us to be proactive. It allows us to have access to a routine or a list or a self care box of items and activities that we know work for us and can allow us to feel better in the moment. Remembering that being proactive in our self care and making sure that we're safeguarding it can help prevent us entering a place of burnout and then having to be more reactive in how we practice taking care of ourselves. We've come to the end of our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure to host this webinar, as well as the other webinars we had prepared for this series. This is our last webinar of the year, and so I wanted to take the opportunity to wish you a fantastic rest of the year, a fantastic rest of your day and your week. I hope that you really stay connected and honor how you define the holidays to be for you. I hope that you take very good care of yourself and slow down and give yourself permission to pause. Thank you again so much for joining me. If you have any questions, feedback, or thoughts, feel free to reach out. I can be reached at wellness@guard.me. Thank you again and have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time.